How Comic Hour with your hosts, Andrew Glonner
and Chris Ramos. Hello.
Tonight, we do Doctor Strange. This is our little double feature, as you say. We're going to touch on a couple stories with the character, and we might touch on some possibilities with the Multitude of Madness, the sequel to Doctor Strange.
Andrew is the Doctor Strange resident expert, in case anyone was wondering. This
Yes.
is his man.
This is my I guess my specialty is the magics of things and stuff, and the multiverse and extra dimensional stuff and things that are not very grounded.
He's not the ground level hero guy. He's the out in space
For sure, and I have a Doctor Strange shirt on. So.
The inner eye.
Yes.
Is this probably the one of the more popular ones?
It is definitely. So you could trace Doctor Strange back all the way to Steve Ditko and Stan Lee in the early 60s, early to mid 60s, I would say. They had one of the most iconic runs to flesh out the character and things like that. And then each writer's kind of did certain things with the character. When you're talking about magic, literally there's nothing you can't do, but you have to put some sort of boundaries. So you have to, it's very like, there's a cost to magic. There's certain physical things or you have to go through different boundaries or different rules for sure with magic.
So see, when Doctor Strange was kind of popping up through the Marvel Comics world back in the day, I mean, this story, so this is Doctor Strange, A Separate Reality, which is like two big storylines.
Yes.
And I do not have it in a physical form. So
yes,
going against what we have said in the podcast.
Yes, but I have it.
Andrew has it.
Yes.
He has it
and so I picked this up, maybe 10 years ago or so. And this is one of my first graphic novels that I picked up. And that got me into reading comics, being like loving magic and how it's portrayed in the comic form. And then just became one of my favorite characters to follow.
So is there page numbers on that? How many pages is this?
So this one is about 173 pages.
All right. Yeah. Cause the only way that I could find it, that I didn't find that exact one in digital, but I did find the complete collection, the epic collection.
Yes.
And for those of you who don't know, there's complete collections and epic collections. They're both paperbacks, but one is like, I think just a short run, and then the epic collection is like an entire huge series run. So it's many, many, many pages.
Sure.
But the epic collection on this one runs through, it's still called A Separate Reality. So if you're looking for it, but it covers the Doctor Strange run that was happening from 1974 to 1987. It doesn't collect all of those.
Right.
It's just that
time period.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's one of the stories we're going to talk about. And then another story we'll briefly touch on is Doctor Strange and Doctor Doom, Triumph and Torment.
Which is super popular.
Yes,
because
that's one of the big highlighted stories for him as well.
Mike Mignola artwork. Yes.
Yep. And that was under the Marvel original graphic novels that they tried doing. They were like 80-page stories along those lines.
Where they said, we're not going to actually even put this into comics, or even into the comic book run chronologically. Just you can write your own graphic novel, which is its own story, standalone. And they just started pumping those out.
Sure.
And those weren't very long either. Those were probably 100 pages maybe. I think.
Yeah, and I think this came out, mid 80s, if I'm thinking about it. But that one's written by Roger Stern and Mike Mignola are the two big ones on that.
Yes.
Mark Badger. So that one is very cool because it's almost a road trip adventure for Doctor Doom and Doctor Strange, two characters that should be mortal enemies, but they find a way to help each other.
The good and the bad mixed in together.
Yeah. But first, we're going to start with A Separate Reality. A Separate Reality was written by Steve Englehart, and the art was done by Frank Brunner. And what did you think? First hot take.
Well, I mean, straight off the bat, what I did was I looked at the epic collection and kind of broke it down into what the true storyline of A Separate Reality is based on Andrew's graphic novel, which is like 8 issues, something like that.
Yeah.
So
9.
Yeah. So, what I liked right away was number one, it gives you a really good primer to what Doctor Strange is, because it just throws you right into the most like mystical, cosmic, sort of dimension warping, time traveling. It's everything that Doctor Strange should be. And sometimes, I remember Doctor Strange being a big part. I guess the first time I really started noticing him was maybe like when the Infinity War came out.
Sure.
Maybe before that.
Yeah.
But like he played a huge role in the Infinity War.
Right. Because you got to get characters from one side of the universe to the other side of the universe. And there's not a lot of characters that can do that.
Yeah. And they always had him pop up. Like, I don't want to say that he was like a literary crutch.
Yeah, he's a Deus Ex Machina, I think they call it.
Yeah, he was like a savior guy. Like where, if you were working on a story, and then you kind of worked your way into a corner, and you're like, geez, I don't know how to end this.
Magic.
We need something really, really fantastical to happen. Right. And it was like, boom, Doctor Strange appears, and he's like, what do you need? And he just warps whatever he wants and makes it happen. So
absolutely,
he was always like this thing that just appeared. He was like the Dumbledore of like Marvel
sure,
comics.
the Gandalf.
Yeah, he was just like, hey guys,
right,
I'm back and I've done some research and this is what we can do.
Yeah.
So he has popped up through the years, like in Spider-Man and Daredevil. I mean, just all the Avengers. He always really popped up in. He was part of the Defenders.
Yep, that was one of the classic teams he was part of.
That was in the 70s, late 70s. So he has teamed up. I mean, he's just been part of the Marvel universe forever, I guess is a good way to say it.
And he's always like teaching students and trying to educate like the Marvel universe characters and just students just to carry on his legacy too. Yeah. Because that's how he kind of grew up and, learning his powers after his car accident, things like that. So he's trying to, keep the legacy going but trying to help people along.
And you've always got the idea that he's just epically strong. Like he's just like
so he's super overpowered.
Yeah. But like I always got this idea that Doctor Strange was always like hiding like his true powers. Like he was always like capable of a great many things, but he never like showed them all, right? He
sure. I guess
used the same
you're kind of seeing that though in this story, I believe.
Yeah, where he gets like really whittled down to like, what do you have left? And he's like, I have this. Well, what do you have left now? Well, I have this. And it's like he's always got something, which makes him an
he's always learning character. And he's always that's maybe one of his boundaries or one of his weaknesses or not strength, I guess, but he's always learning. And if he can't, he's always got to try to think his way out of it.
Yeah,
the situation.
Like if he just meditates, he'll figure it out.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
So why don't you give the rundown of what issues the actual Separate Reality graphic novel is?
Sure. So this volume collects Marvel Premiere 9 and 10, 12 and 14, and Doctor Strange Volume 2, 1 and 2, 4 and 5.
Yeah. So then the Epic Collection has the Marvel Premieres came out like 1972. The other Doctor Strange ones, the new Doctor Strange number 1 was 1974.
Yeah.
So, we're
this
talking
is classic,
a while ago.
like Bronze Age Marvel.
Yep.
So there's definitely a lot of action, but it's still very dialogue heavy as well. I think Frank Brunner, the artist on this, shows like the mystical side of things, kind of taking what Steve Ditko did and just making it over the top as well.
Yeah, I mean they do a really great job. If you look at the artwork, even just each page, there's a lot to cover. So it's like there's a lot happening. The backgrounds are swirling mists or, exploding planets or, there's just like, how do you adequately illustrate that he's in his mind instead of like in reality? And, that's always been like the draw for people to read Doctor Strange, even from Steve Ditko, of just like, how do you draw this like, just so fantastically really just something that's totally outside of what you would imagine is happening and absolutely. Put it on a page.
And this story starts out in space, which Doctor Strange doesn't spend a lot of time in. So it was very interesting to like start out the story like that. You're like, oh, what's he doing out in space in the first place? I don't need to know. He's just kind of traveling around. He was the story starts out. We'll just briefly get into it. He's looking for the Ancient One. The Ancient One was kidnapped by like aliens or something, and he's got to go find his master. That's like the Ancient One. That's his mentor that taught him all his powers and stuff like that.
And in the Doctor Strange movie, that was the one that was played by Tilda Swinton.
Yeah, when they gender shifted the character.
So same idea.
Both roles were, greatly done.
Yeah. Same idea. Just someone who was the big takeaway from this, though, is that the Ancient One is Doctor Strange's mentor and sort of who Doctor Strange goes to when he gets stuck. And so this person has, more knowledge than Doctor Strange. So then you're like, that's weird. Sorcerer Supreme.
And so like the Ancient One was the Sorcerer Supreme in his time. And then when Doctor Strange was, learning his magic and stuff, and he was battling Baron Mordo and things like that, and all the other villains and stuff, the Ancient One was like, I can't do that anymore. I'm so old. I can't really do that.
So that was like 700, 900 years
Yeah, it's
old.
like 700 years old. I think 600, something like that. Eon's old. And so he's like, I'm going to pass the role on to you. So it's very passing of the torch. And when you talk about that in the succession of, that role, you kind of protects like the universe. So I would say, that's one of the first storylines in this book was the passing of the torch. Ancient One, he is passing on, and that's the only way for him to like be rid of one of the main Doctor Strange villains, Shumagorath.
Dun, dun, dun. You would think, that's the other thing that I really like about Doctor Strange is when you think of other heroes like, I think long ago we said we should stop jumping from Marvel to DC, but it's easy to do.
Yeah.
So when you think of other villains like Batman's villains, right? They're all generally human.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. You look at like Spider-Man's and the Avengers and things, they get a little more wacky, but like Doctor Strange, I really do like that. Like Shumagorath is just like a tentacled eyeball.
Squiggle, like the Cthulhu-like monster.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Like,
and I think that was probably where that inspiration came from.
And people see it as like, what is this, like the Kraken or something? But like then you realize that it's like infinitely powerful, and so world destroying, universe collapsing kind of thing. And it's like, all right, so this form is just an entity. You don't have to put
one
it
of
into
the great Doctor Strange villains, because it takes so much power and so much energy and thinking outside the box to actually defeat this foe.
Yes.
Like, it's not an Avengers level threat where they just punch their way out.
No, it's like getting into your mind and just like terrorizing you.
Yeah. A lot of telepathy, a lot of strange magics that they're not used to, things like that. And so what happens is Shumagorath possesses the Ancient One, his master, and he's got to figure out how to get him out of that situation and save him from that. And he literally has to like end his life, spoiler, to get through that.
There's a part too where Doctor Strange gets grabbed by Shumagorath and it's just holding him in its tentacles. And then Doctor Strange is like, I will just slip into my invisible form, my spirit form,
the astral
right?
projection.
I'll just leave
Astral
my
form.
body there and just sort of, slip away this.
Yeah.
And Shumagorath's like, where are you going? Like it sees his
Everything.
spiritual form. So which was like, again, another just sort of subtle nod that this is a definite serious threat.
Right.
But I always, I mean, everyone who has read Doctor Strange, and even in I don't know if they do this in the movies a lot, but he's always like throwing out those phrases.
Yeah.
By the hoary host of Horgoth. It's like,
or the crimson bands of Sidorak.
Yeah, I don't know. Like they did that a couple times in the movies, but they don't make a big thing out of it.
No, yeah.
He is always like yelling his powers, which is cool.
Sure. I mean, he still says them when he's like spell casting things, most of the time. But yeah, it's not like the comics where he kind of, if he's saying a very significant spell, he has to say it.
Right. And you get the idea too that there's other magicians in the world and that they're all sort of in tuned and connected. So, when you think of Doctor Strange as the Sorcerer Supreme, it's like, well, what does that exactly mean?
Sure.
And, there's mystical powers that he's able to tap into, and he has to, I think, just like the quickness of thought, is what.
He can't take too much time. He has to be very on his feet and just keep the story going.
Yes.
And I think Steve Englehart, the writer, he definitely, even though this has a lot of dialogue, he keeps that pacing going and he keeps you like in the story.
Yeah.
That's what I enjoyed about his
It really is good. And there's multiple storylines. There's, it jumps back and forth to other characters.
Right.
But it always comes back to Doctor Strange being like torn. He always has to make a decision that he doesn't want to. It's kind of like part of his character.
Absolutely. That the cost of magic, that sacrifice, the self-sacrifice that he has to make, things like that.
And like he's above, he's thinking of things on a different level. And that's what
these universe, ending decisions.
Yeah, he's like, well, if this, if this person, I don't know, goes into a coma, people are like, oh no. He's like, well, that just saved an entire universe. He knows these things.
Absolutely.
So he has to make the better call.
Yeah. And it was also cool when he was fighting like Shumagorath, he was preying on his villains and like his worst fears and things like that. So you got to see like appearances of Dormammu. That's like one of his other big, huge villains. You get to see Baron Mordo pop up. You get to see Nightmare. If you're a first time like reader, I think this is a great like entryway. Just if you don't want to do an origin story, this is a great crash course through Doctor Strange.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's a good little primer instead of going all the way back for 20 years.
Yeah. And we also get introduced to Clea, Doctor Strange's like comic book girlfriend for like, it's not the first time, but I would say this is one of her more significant appearances. Yeah. So it was cool.
So she becomes part of the story as in like, it's his, I think, she's a literary device also. Like she's his connection to
humanity,
just being a male and just like, just being a person.
And so she is the daughter of Dormammu. Oh. Yeah. I didn't know that. Doctor Strange knowledge up.
That's why he keeps her around.
Well, not so much that she like rebelled against her father, and he wanted her to become like the ruler of his dark dimension that he rules over, and she's like, no, I don't want to be a part of that. I'm on the good side. I don't really believe in that. What you're doing. So she went up with him, and she's also like his apprentice as well.
Yeah. So she's mega powerful, and that's cool.
So that was a really cool storyline just to kind of set up what the tone of the book was, kind of give you the crash course, the trials of Doctor Strange, you could call it. So that was pretty cool.
It's like the distance that he'll go to become even more powerful. He's always sort of gathering objects and gathering power. And then it moves into the next storyline of, what if he loses one of those objects of power? What if he gets his eye taken? Yeah.
So the eye of the Agamotto is one of Doctor Strange's like relics that he uses literally for everything.
It is like every few pages he's like, I will address the eye. Yeah.
And so what it does is kind of shows some things like true form or breaks any illusion, things like that.
Or lets him, I think when he like
helps him like power up a bit.
Yeah. Like he takes his cape off, but he like goes and meditates into the eye or something. Mm-hmm. It's his inner spirit, right? Like his inner power
self. Yeah, you could say. Yeah.
It's the next level.
Right. So, he's trying to piece together where this is all coming from, who is doing that. And we get kind of introduced to this Cagliostro character. Yeah. And so Cagliostro is this time hopping wizard, I guess, of some sort, or sorcerer, which was a different villain of like, he was even more powerful than anything Doctor Strange has faced. And he already faced Shumagorath.
I thought so. I mean, like again, we always encourage everyone to read these stories, so we don't want to like totally just spoil everything, but we encourage you to read it. But the overall idea is that there is magicians out there that are constantly seeking power. And,
Yes.
Doctor Strange is
definitely everyone's fighting for power.
Yeah, he's doing the same thing, but he's also sort of
keeping the balance.
He's like doing the Indiana Jones where he's like gathering artifacts to protect them from falling into the wrong hands. But then while he's doing that, he's also sort of secretly powering himself up.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, got to collect them all kind of thing where he's the Sorcerer Supreme and it's sort of his job to make sure that there's a balance, right? So then Cagliostro finds out that there's a finite amount of magical power in the whole universe. That's what it is. And everyone that's alive that can tap into it uses a portion of it.
Yeah.
So if you have,
because he does all he goes to different time periods.
Yeah, so he's like,
if you've got, I absorb the magic.
If you've got 1,000 people tapping into it, okay, fine, you got to split that power 1,000 ways. But he's like, you know what? If I go farther back in time, then I'm going to be tapping into this power that other people have not touched yet, which makes me stronger.
Sure.
Okay, that's cool.
So that's a very in-depth and detailed story, but it's really cool to follow along and see the progression and the build of that story.
It's just like Steve Englehart's just sitting back like, how about this story?
Right.
How about, that's what they did. Just come up with wacky stuff.
And you get to kind of touch on, Merlin when, Cagliostro goes back to steal his power, kind of introduce more wizards and different characters throughout time.
Yeah, and the other cool thing was that he destroyed a city.
Yep.
And then it kind of the camera kind of pulls away a little bit.
Right.
And you see that was like Sodom and Gomorrah, and you're like, oh, that's a cool little Bible reference there.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It's affecting history.
Yeah.
And then, Merlin.
Because it's this butterfly effect that you're like, oh, is this going to affect time for all?
Yeah. And you're like, oh, so these events happen and that's how they happened. Yeah. I always like that when people go back in time and then it's like, oh, we accidentally just, made the Hindenburg crash. And that was part of this because we're time travelers.
Absolutely. And this was back when Doctor Strange really didn't have any handlebars on his character where you could do anything. He found a way to time travel just by reading it.
Yeah.
Right. And we do see that in the movie with the time stone and things like that, but not on this scale where he's going back decades and going back into the past so much.
Well, and in the comics, I think you hit it right. You hit it right on that. He was just like, I have to go learn this, and boom, I learned it. You know, it's like okay, that moves the story along at a really fast pace, but at the same time, you can't get too caught up in the details of it. You have to get
kind of accept it.
Yeah, you have to ride this storm of what's going on.
Absolutely. So that was really cool to explore that space and just different villains because he's not a regular recurring villain either. Baramordo does show up, but then he goes, I'm going to beat you, Doctor Strange. I'm like, oh, okay. But he's trying to do a power grab too and work under Cagliostro, but Cagliostro's like, I don't care about you.
Yeah, he's like, I'm going to become a god, so I really don't care.
Yeah. I mean, Baramordo in his own sense is a good arch rival for Doctor Strange because he's on the same power level as him almost. But he's very minor role in this story.
Yeah. And Shumagorath comes again.
Yes.
And it shows Shumagorath with his big eyeball and all his tentacles choking a bunch of cavemen. And and then it's like, what's going on here? And Doctor Strange says that's early man, and Shumagorath used to dominate the earth for millennia.
Yeah, he was around at the start of creation.
Yeah, so it's if this happens that we let him do this, then man won't actually even ever evolve. So
and it was a cool callback when Steve Englehart's writing this. He's like, I want to bring back this awesome villain that I love to write about into the story. How can I do that?
Yeah. And but that's the cool thing. It just lets them kind of continue and just throw the story around. The artist and the writer can just keep moving the story in any direction they want. And there's few characters in comics anywhere where you're allowed to just constantly mix it up.
Yeah.
And I bet people really love working on Doctor Strange.
Right. You get to have so much fun and a lot of freedom with the character.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then the last story is actually probably, it starts out very weird, but it's also one of my favorites, is where he fights this villain called Silver Dagger.
Yeah. Silver Dagger.
So Silver Dagger finds a way to kill Doctor Strange. And you're like, what?
He's just
you just killed the main character.
He's just another magician.
Yeah, he's just another magician, but he's like this assassin thing. He's like, oh, I can pierce your barriers and all your magic, and I can find a way to kill you. He's like,
with
what?
His silver dagger.
Yes. And so Doctor Strange finds a really obscure way to come back from the dead. And so that's like, how do you go on this like grand scale of things, first of all? But it was really cool. You got to introduce the orb of Agamotto, and nobody's heard of that.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a very new thing. You're like, oh, okay, we've heard about the Eye of Agamotto. What's this?
Yeah. And then just flipping through page by page too, the artwork is really, really, I think, spot on for this story. Each page has its own huge story to tell, and it really, I think they finally found a really good gel working together on this one. The colors and like the backgrounds aren't necessarily anything like super exciting, but the characters are really, really close to the camera like all the time. They're filling the panels, and I think it's really fun.
Sure. And I think especially when this is like I said, one of my first graphic novels, this kind of said, this is what Marvel art is.
Mm-hmm.
And, this is what I identify like Doctor Strange's classic costume and how it's supposed to look.
Yeah.
Not to say that what they did in the movies was bad. It was different. And I think maybe they'll start getting back to this because they took out a lot of the yellows of everything, and because they just kind of left it like red and blue. And I was like, oh, but where's like the yellow gloves and like the yellowness in his cape?
Yellow trim and the stash.
Yeah, the stash.
Yeah, and like everything else too is like every panel, every page has some sort of heroic pose or someone screaming or some sort of,
right,
over exaggerated gesture, and that's just what it is.
And I think they took like the concept of like Kirby dots and the way Steve Ditko drew magic, and they said, okay, let's keep doing that, but let's like make it grandiose. So
the next
level, absolutely. So we definitely encourage you fellow readers out there in the world to check out the story. We really enjoyed it. And there's just a lot of surprises that you'll come across in this story. You're like, what's that? How can he possibly overcome this? And the different conversations he's having with these cosmic and mystical like entities. It's pretty incredible what they accomplish.
Yeah, and a lot of times he becomes the reader so that you are, flying through space with him and figuring out things with him, because he's like, what's that up ahead? Mm-hmm. What is this? And you're sort of right there with him. And so you kind of get caught up in his humanity side of it, which is a big factor all the time, because he's up against characters and ideas and themes like eternity and
death.
Like
that was the big one for me. I was like, whoa,
and
like, it's very philosophical.
He's
as well.
Like, I'll figure this out, and so it's really you can tell why Doctor Strange became so popular, and he got his own series. That's really what this separate reality puts into play, is that it went to Doctor Strange #1. So okay, he's got his own series now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess we can start talking about the second story that we read.
Yes.
Which was called Doctor Strange, Doctor Doom, Triumph and Torment.
This is the double feature part of it.
Yes, double feature.
Woo, we did it. Doctor Strange and Doctor Doom, Triumph and Torment.
Right. And so this one was written by Roger Stern and illustrated by Mike Mignola, Hellboy fame. Mm-hmm. And Mark Badger did the inks and coloring on it. So right off the bat, going into this, I didn't know if I would even like this story because of the art. And, we talk about, this is the same illustrator that did Hellboy, and wrote it. It's like, oh, okay. I know what that looks like, because it's very, very ink heavy, and the blacks and the shadows he does a lot with. This has none of that style.
No.
So he did all the pencils, which you can kind of see where he's starting to kind of form this art style that we would come to know. But when Mark Badger approaches his art, it's very like color pencil and very organic, I guess. That's how I described it. How would you describe it?
So, I mean, I think what happened was, and I'm sure if I look this up, it's probably not true, but Mike Mignola had a really fast art style, and my guess is that he could pound out pages really, really quickly.
Sure.
And that was one of the biggest draws for like John Byrne and other artists was like, they could just pound out pages and Kirby. I mean, Jack Kirby, everyone says, my gosh, Jack Kirby worked on like 4 books a week and he was just pounding out 30 pages a week, which is just unheard of. I think Mike Mignola's artwork is, like you said, starting to get to that minimalistic style where, if you look at some panels, it's like there's just a hillside or a tree or, there's a lone figure walking in like the shadows and, just like part of a building and like a bird. And, he started to really strip down what you needed to look at on a comic book page. Like he said, okay, we're flying across country. Here's a plane. Here's some hillside. Boom.
Right.
Okay, we're chopping through the jungle.
We're in a cave. Yeah. What does that look like?
Here's a guy here. Boom. And he did a really good job of kind of getting the scene across really fast. I think some critics of Mignola would say that his characters are not unique enough where like each character looks like other characters.
Sure.
It's just sort of like, oh, here's a big bulky guy and now that's the thing. And here's a big bulky guy and now that's Cable. And here's a big bulky guy.
Yeah, because he definitely broke away from the norm for sure.
So he's like, okay, you want bulky guys? That's that. You want skinny guys? Here you go. You want Doctor Strange? Doctor Strange looks like Tony Stark. I mean, it's like, okay, fine. For
sure.
He's just, so he wasn't,
where that was coming from.
Yeah, he wasn't really pulling too much out where some of the really, really standout artists from Marvel and DC and other indies, each character has such a unique look. You know who that is without even looking at the whole page.
I will say though, the more you invest in the story, the more you appreciate the art. And then it gives you a sense of place and a sense of the tone that Roger Stern was going for when he was writing this. I think if you don't have that, one of the two could balance each other off.
Well, okay, so here's, not to get in too much of a rabbit trail, but like, okay, so like in movies where you're watching and there's like a horror violent scene and it shows like everything, right? Yeah. And there's like nothing left to the imagination. It's just like, wow, that was a super violent scene, right? Okay. Then when you get to a horror movie and like violence or some sort of the camera pans off and then you just hear a scream, you kind of fill that in your head, right? Yeah. Like you fill in the scene. So Mignola, I think, does that for us is like he's pushing the story along and he's pushing the all of the dialogue, but like he doesn't need to fill in every single tiny little piece. Yeah. And some artists, for some reason, some artists who do that look lazy, but I think Mignola actually does it where he's really paying attention to like negative space.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, people, letting it breathe a bit.
Yeah, and like sometimes it's in really tight, sometimes it's out really far, sometimes it's like an explosion, sometimes there's 20 people on the page. So I think he has a good handle of it, but you're right, the coloring and the inking is just sort of like really sparse.
We're kind of comparing the two stories as we go along when we can, but like the first story, the coloring on the art is very tight. And, it's very like stylized and things like that. Yeah. This is very organic. And like you said, there's more space in the panel and you're kind of letting the art drive this story more. I would say.
And it actually is very traditional in this time where the panels are super square, where like in a separate reality. Yeah. Sometimes the panels are upside down. And sometimes it's like the eye of Agamotto is like shattering the page, Right. And so like they had a lot of more freedom. This is very much like a an actual comic strip, like
Yeah.
almost like they laid out the page and said, "Now fill in."
And
these
this
squares.
story is way more grounded than Separate Reality
Right.
is, for sure. This is taking place on Earth, and for the most part, and it's kind of has this calmness to it, and it like the story still does a really good job. It's not not carried down by dialogue as much as the first story is.
Mhm.
The Separate Reality. Roger Stern does a very good job of giving us a lot with a little said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the overall story is that Doctor Strange is noticing that Doctor Doom is meddling in things that are not to be meddled in. And that's where Doctor
Yes.
Strange usually jumps in and says,
Yeah.
hey, whoa. You're
Yeah.
going to like break everything if you keep
Mhm.
going. So in this one, he's like, I'm going with you and we're going to figure this out together, which is kind of like, okay, he's like a
For
escort,
sure.
right?
Yeah. And it kind of starts out with this call to arms, or a gathering of sorts of magic users in this Marvel world that Roger Stern is doing. And he's like, oh, come together. We have to do this succession power thing. It's almost like a tournament power of sorts, where this only happens once a millennia,
Mhm.
of course. And we need, this is put on by like some of the entities that we use their powers of. Then they say whoever is the winner of this contest gets one wish granted, or one favor granted, I guess, from the Sorcerer Supreme. And so they're like, oh, okay, that sounds pretty cool. All right. And so none of these other characters that other magic users were notable. So that was kind of cool just to see like different cultures having like
Mhm.
a magician
Mhm.
or a supreme or whatever they decided to. So that was kind of cool. If you were to do the story today, it would be all well-known characters and things like that, which they've did later on. But
Because there's plenty of magic users. There's only one
Sorcerer
Sorcerer
Supreme.
Supreme.
Yep.
And Doctor Doom, I don't know if many people realize, but Doctor Doom hasn't like adequately been introduced in the MCU
Yes.
movies. I mean, he was in the
Yeah.
bad Fantastic Four movie, but
Sure.
he is a awesome character. I mean,
Yeah.
he's probably my favorite villain in all of Marvel.
Okay.
Easily, because he's just got so many different layers to him, and he's a Fantastic Four villain, and I'm a big Fantastic Four fan. So I
Yeah.
mean, he just has to be that powerful. And he, his mom was a gypsy witch,
Yes.
and she
Which was
sort of
gadzooks.
delved into yeah. It's like she was like into what
witchcraft and things like that.
all that kind of stuff.
Just because they're, the traveling gypsies, their sort of family that they were traveling with, they were always kind of tormented and teased at and things like that. And she said, "Oh, enough's enough with that.
Yeah,
the
I'll
authorities
figure it
won't
out
help
now."
me. I will take it upon myself to figure out a way."
And so Doctor Doom was there with her, and he was just as driven. And
Yeah.
through his life, he was always competing with Mr. Fantastic, Reed Richards from
Yep.
Fantastic Four. And then eventually he kind of got into the sort of the darker side of magic, which is like, if you look at like Reed Richards, he's very science.
Yes.
He's very like real and
Mhm.
physics. And then Doctor Doom went into the mystical
Sure. After
power.
I guess he started with that. Yeah, he started with magic, and then he kind of got as far as he could, and then said, "Well, I hit the wall there. What can science do for me, and how can I, combine the two and hybrid the two?"
And so he's like super powerful. And
Mhm.
it is in this story, you notice as Doctor Doom and Doctor Strange sort of team up a little bit, you notice just how strong they both are. Like,
Absolutely.
wow,
Yeah.
Doctor Doom's holding his own, and he's we were joking that he is like the hammer, and Doctor Strange is like, let's think about this, and then
Right.
Doctor Doom just goes in and just starts like
I got no time for that.
blasting everyone with lightning or something.
Yeah.
I'll take care of this.
Right. And I would say, Doctor Doom isn't as powerful or as adept as Doctor Strange is when it comes to magic, but he knows enough to dabble around with it.
Yeah, and he knows enough to like muscle his way through.
Yes.
Right. So he could just sort of if he gets into trouble, I think he could just pound his way out.
Yeah.
With
He doesn't
magical
prefer
power.
it compared to like pew 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 with with his armor, but he definitely still uses it from time to time.
So Dr. Doom is his mom was taken by Mephisto.
Yep. Because you never make a deal with Mephisto.
No. and Mephisto is like Marvel's version of the devil. And that's pretty much what that is.
That is the one villain, I guess, in the whole Marvel universe where fans right now are like, when are we getting this?
I know they need
Where is it? Where is it? Come on.
Well, that would be like next. That would take them into the next level of like, this is now getting into
another layer.
The real devil portion of this.
Right.
Which would open up like the Scarlet Witch. It would open up a lot, right?
Yeah.
So I think
a lot of characters have interacted with Mephisto, and he's that villain that you can't beat. You just can't.
Yeah. And if they introduce the Celestials and stuff, I mean, heck, it's time.
Right. Yeah. There's always like, I don't know, like you could see an M somewhere, or you could see like a character smiling extra hard, or people are really trying to read into it so much, and I'm just waiting for Kevin Feige to like rip off his like a mask or something. Goes, I am Mephisto.
It's like that person's wearing a lot of red.
Right. Even reading into the color palette of something, you're like, what?
So Dr. Doom has been his whole life trying to find out how to free his mother from Mephisto. And so he has
her soul is trapped in his dimension in his grip.
He's gone to the hell dimension many times. He's always been beat. And so he's just constantly trying to figure it out. But then when you get down there, you realize that Mephisto's like mega powerful. Like even Doctor Strange is like, we got to get out of here.
Yeah, we only have like minutes to do it because I can't keep this up all day. I'm doing better than you are right now, but we got to hurry up with this. We got to figure it out. And so they make an alliance with each other to free his mother's soul, and they kind of figure out how to get there. Strange helps him with that, but once they get there, he's like, okay, this is all you for sure. Like lead the way. Mephisto definitely tempts Doom with trying to, free his mother's soul, and has him betray Doctor Strange and things like that. And so you kind of figure out this dynamic of how do these characters work with each other, and they're going to still stick to what they do. And, Doctor Doom is still evil. Even though he makes this alliance with them, he's still going to act like Doctor Doom.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like too, like when they finally do catch up with Mephisto, that, Doctor Doom has a little bit of a trick, like they're trying to pull a trick on him, and so right away, Mephisto's like,
never trusted me.
He's like, you mortals seek to deceive the Prince of Deception. It's just like, oh yeah, that's right. And so they start battling Mephisto, and it's like both of them are just hammering him, and Mephisto's just standing there. So that has always been a huge story in Marvel Comics. Like they set a rule, like they set up this huge storyline, like Thanos or like Celestials or
these cosmic entities,
the Living Tribunal. I mean, these are all like mega huge.
These are ruling forces of the universe,
Galactus, right? And so it's almost like you set up a rule that this can never break, or like this can never fall, or like imagine that there's a 100-ton block of granite or something, and you're like, wow, nothing could break this. And then of course the next step is something breaks it. So that's what Marvel really does a good job of, is like setting up these power levels where you think, wow, this character's crazy overpowered. Like we were just talking about Doctor Strange. Well, he can do anything. So when he runs up against someone and they just stand there and just take it, you're like, okay, this is serious.
Yeah, absolutely. And each writer in their own way between both stories finds ways of doing his power set different, or finding like unconventional ways to handle the situation. And that's why I always appreciated you always like, oh, that's a different twist on that. Okay, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah. Well, and here, I'm kind of flipping through some of the pages where they're actually down in Mephisto's region. this is where Mignola's artwork, I think, really shines.
really comes out.
Which is funny because it's like they're in hell and it's like, oh, Hellboy kind of stuff.
Yeah,
but
sure.
he does a great job of like just putting in the basics. Like all you need to know is that, Doctor Strange is powering up, and all you need to know is that there's, crazy amounts of
Yeah.
lightning and beams of
Right.
energy,
The demons and things like that.
Yeah, and it's like, and then through it all, you just see one figure standing there while the whole page is a wreck of just like magma and lightning and storms.
Yeah.
And so, they really did kind of think about like who is going to be the focal point of each page. And that's why I think Mignola is really good.
And just to touch on Mark Badger, the inker and the colorist, he did, when you get down into like the sort, like in the story, the use of color and the use of lighting that he illustrates in this, on point. Like that, that's really his strong suit when it comes to this. It's not traditional by any means, but like when you see magic and the different weird colors that he can produce with that, some of like neons and the pinks and things and the blues really shine through.
Well, I mean, and this is when they were painting these panels.
Yeah.
Like with watercolor paints, gouache, all that stuff.
Okay.
They're really like actually filling in this with not a computer.
Yeah.
So,
right. Yeah. The kind of the old school approach.
Yeah,
to it. Yeah.
So they have to break down these into like, what's the color scheme of this story going to be, and what's this battle going to turn out to be? Is it largely green? Is it largely orange? Is it? And actually, when you look at the battle of when they're finally fighting Mephisto, Doctor Strange and Doctor Doom are using lots of greens and yellows, and then all of a sudden the whole battle shifts to red, and you're like, oh,
it's
you
so
lost.
cool, and it kind of gives that emotional like intensity to it, like do, and especially it sets this part self from like the flashbacks and scenes like that, because then they'll gray it out and say this is clearly a flashback, and or we're gonna do backstory right now and things like that, explainer. So I thought that was cool too. I'm
not saying that they had more to think about back then, as far as colorists go, but like nowadays, I mean, you can kind of put together your color scheme in the computer, and then if you don't really like it, you can just like, oh, let's change it. Where back then it's like they had to really think every panel out and like, how is this going to progress? And
really
more
to invest in.
It works well with the story. The story is really a lot of fun, and if you're a fan of Doctor Strange or Doctor Doom, I mean, this fits the bill, because these are two main characters that were probably considered the stronger magic users of this time. I mean, this came out in the 80s, right?
Yeah, I would say so.
Late 80s.
Yeah.
So, everyone wants to see a team up. Everyone wants to see, who is going to fight the Muhammad Ali of the comics.
Right. And these, I would say before this story, it would be hard to imagine these two characters, coming across and fighting each other, unless there was something big cosmic going on, something huge beyond belief, like Infinity Gauntlet or something like that. And it was cool just to see that kind of do it on a little more smaller scale and kind of be more intimate with the characters and see how they would approach the situation.
Well, and I can imagine that the Marvel Comics, the bullpen, threw together a bunch of ideas and said, hey, you know what? Doctor Strange is pretty popular. Doctor Doom is becoming pretty popular. And you know what? Let's throw them together into a story and put out a graphic novel. Because that's what they did. So this was a standalone graphic novel, totally outside of the actual comic book individual monthly series.
And this was only about 80 pages too. So it's brief enough that it's about the length of like 4 issues. So it keeps it together, and it tells a really cohesive story.
It's kind of like if you had a monthly series of novels or a monthly comic strip in the newspaper or something, and then they said, hey, take these characters and just do a standalone story. That's exactly what this was. And they gave the artists and writers sort of some freedom to work on a project that wasn't dependent on years and years of continuity and years of like, what's this going to do to the character? It was just like, let's break out, do this story. This is a little side quest, right?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
for them as characters.
Yeah, for sure.
And, maybe someday down the road, they reference it in the comic book, say like, oh, remember when we went and fought Mephisto?
Yeah. I mean, this still,
really cool.
I mean, after the story, they still occasionally, when they do talk to each other, they have that respect for each other.
Yeah.
And that
was
still
part of it.
resonated, I think, throughout everything. You talk about like Jonathan Hickman's run on Avengers, and
Mhm.
like when they're tearing through universes and blowing up universes, like he's right up there. The Secret Wars, totally. That
Yeah.
was totally a big thing.
Well, I mean, everyone knows heroes and villains have sort of an odd respect for each other. You know,
Yeah.
it's just part of it.
Sure. So yeah, and then Doctor Strange is going to have his own movie coming out in like a month or so. I think it's in mid-May that's coming out, and so we're really having high hopes for that movie, and we'll see how they break the universe and that. So that'll be really cool to see, and what kind of weird stories we can get out of that too.
And we're ready. We're ready. We're doing our reading ahead of time just to revisit some of these old stories. And we encourage you to also do that.
Yeah, get some more flavor of Doctor Strange. See what, explore what the character can do and what he's all about and how powerful he is and how important he is too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, how important he is.
Absolutely. So this has been another great episode of Bam Pow Comic Con.
Double feature.
Double feature. Woo! All right. This is Andrew Glonner
And Chris Ramos.
signing off.
Bye-bye.